my name's Heather from the World Bank, and today we're going to go over a couple new topics for our beginner knitting videos. To start, we'll be showing you how to knit with two different yarns at the same time. So you'll have two different skeins, basically, and we'll show you how to use them both at the same time, and you can combine them to make, more interesting colors or use different types of yarn at the same time to make a unique fabric. So I'll show you how to do that. It's pretty simple. And then at the same time we'll try a new stitch pattern, and that's it's knitting diagonal, but that shows you a couple of new skills as well, which is increasing one stitch in a row or decreasing one stitch in a row. So that's usually called make one or decrease one. And we'll get a closer look of these two different yarns. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're going to start by knitting with two different yarns at the same time. So they come in two different balls or skeins initially before they're wound. In this case, this is actually a gray cashmere, and it's pretty thin, so we're using a small needle size. It's just a US size 2 for our sample. And then this is a kind of synthetic sparkly fun yarn. It's on a cone, so you don't even have to wind it. These two combined, we actually have a sample, and that's right here. So you can see it makes an interesting new color that you wouldn't get with, just one or the other, or if you switch yarns within the same row, it looks different than when you're holding them at the same time. Reminder for casting on in our first video. It looks a little different when you have two different strands of yarn you're holding, so it's a little harder to see how many you've cast on, but in this case I just cast on 5 stitches, so I had 2, 4, and then 5 there. So to start our first row, we'll turn our work around since we're knitting flat. And you can see I have two colors held at the same time, basically. So this is my working yarn, and they are, together. There's nothing really different. You just want to make sure you keep them together and that you don't separate them and knit with one by accident. Tension-wise, also, you want to make sure one doesn't get kind of bunched up more than the other. That's kind of happened a little back here, but it's not too big a deal, where one strand looks a little longer. Mainly though is that you just don't want to, wind up with one strand of yarn. You want to keep them together and hold them together throughout the whole row. So as I mentioned, we're going to also work in some new skills in terms of knitting diagonal. In this pattern that we showed the sample of, it's only increasing on one side. And then in this other sample, you increase on both sides. So that's what we're going to do for this example. You start with a small amount of stitches and then you slowly grow the fabric to your desired width, and then you can just knit with that same amount of stitches for a while, and then you eventually have to start decreasing. To start the pattern, we have 5 stitches, and we're going to knit the first one. And again, we have our 2 strands of yarn. Keep our ball for each one on the right side so they don't get all mixed up, and you don't want to get your extra yarn too mixed up either, or get knots. So we knit like normal, and then this kind of contradicts what we learned in our last lesson, because you normally don't want to do this, but this is actually a purposeful stitch. So to make a yarn over, which is also referred to as make one in patterns, M1 a lot of the time, at least in American patterns, you will, even though we're gonna knit the next stitch, we want to move our working yarn to the front, and that's usually a no-no. You always want to keep it in the back when you're knitting, but in this case you move it to the front, and then you knit the next stitch, and you can see that made another stitch in between the 2 original ones you had cast on. So it creates this loop, and That's called a yarn over. And now you've increased your number of stitches. You have 3 on this side and 3 on this side, so 6 total right now. So in this pattern, it calls to knit until the last stitch after you've done your yarn over. So I'll knit one here, and then I'll knit another one. Again, this is, even though we're using 2 strands of yarn, it's all the same motion. You just want to keep track that you're using 2, that you don't get caught like going through one here or anything like that. So now we want to make another yarn over before our last stitch. And to do that, you move the yarn from back to front, and then you see how that would wrap over. So now you knit like normal, even though your yarn's in the front. And there you go. We've made another stitch right there. And we reached the end of the row, and now we have, even though it's hard to tell with multiple strands of yarn, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 stitches instead of 5, which we started with, because we made 2 more. So we're slowly increasing this swatch basically, and it'll kind of increase in a triangle shape like this, or like this sample before it was sewn together. So I've just flipped my work over. I'm now on the wrong side of the work. I just finished my increase row. And then on the wrong side, it's pretty easy. We just have to knit straight across in this pattern. So I'll knit the first stitch, holding both strands of yarn. And the yarn over looks a little weird when you get to it. It doesn't look like a normal stitch, but you still will just knit into it. Here's another yarn over, but that is a stitch, so we will knit into it, and then we knit the last stitch. So again, that was just knitting straight across, tighten everything up, and then it's satisfying when the work starts to grow, and I'll show you another increase row just to reiterate the yarn over and making a new stitch. So we flipped over. In this pattern, the first stitch is a knit, so we get that out of the way. Okay. And then the next one, we need to make a new stitch, and it's a yarn over style. So we move the working yarn from back to front, and then you knit the next stitch. And you see you're creating the new stitch on your right. So now we have 3 on the side instead of 2. And then we continue in pattern until 1 stitch before the end. So we just knit a couple more stitches here. Now we just have 1 left on your left needle. And we have to do a yarn over in between. So we move the yarn from back to front. And then you knit the last stitch, and it wraps the yarn around. And now, towards the beginning, and when you're getting used to this, it's always good to count just to make sure you've done it right. So now we're at 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So we started with 5, then we added 2 to 7, and then we added another 2 to 9. So we're all good. We're increasing at the right rate. Yeah, so I'll keep going in this stitch pattern and kind of show you how it develops, but in this case we're making a triangle shape that's increasing evenly on both sides. In this sample it only increases on one side, so that's why it's kind of like a lopsided asymmetrical triangle. And then by only increasing on the wrong side, it's a more gradual increase. If you were increasing like on both sides or anything like that, it's a bit faster and it grows faster. So I'll show you a bit more after I do a few more rows. So I've done a couple rows now, made it pretty far. You can see since we've been knitting straight on both sides, it makes the garter stitch. So that's what's happening here. We have both yarns held at the same time, so you have this marbled effect. And then it's kind of subtle since we're using the purple and the gray. You can see our yarn overs on either side of the sample. It makes kind of a hole in your work, and it's usually like, it can be decorative even in other spots. In this case, it's kind of necessary, but it does make a hole in the knitting basically when you do a yarn over. And that was our increasing on both edge of the work. You can see it's even, so we have like a triangle shape here. And now we're just going to start decreasing, and that'll slowly decrease the number of stitches and close our square. Basically, you can kind of imagine what it'll look like in the end. You're just, you know, starting to decrease on either edge. So I'll show you how to do that now. You knit your first stitch, and you usually do that to keep the edge clean. You don't really want to, you know, increase or decrease on the last stitch. Really, it would look strange. So we knit our first stitch with both yarn strands held double. And then to decrease a stitch, this will be a new skill, is you basically reach over not to the next stitch but to the following one, and you want to get both of these on your working needle. So you're kind of picking up both these stitches at the same time as if you were to knit them. You wrap your yarn around like normal knitting, go through the loop, and then you drop both of these stitches off your left needle. So it's a bit hard to tell with this, but you've basically decreased the number of stitches and you've combined from 2 stitches to 1 stitch. So you've decreased the number by 1. So after you've done that, that's the main trick for the beginning, and then we're going to knit all the way to our last 3 stitches and do that again. So we're just knitting like normal into 1 stitch with our yarn held double and trying to keep tension consistent. And then we have 3 stitches left, and we want to knit these 2 together again and decrease them. So I kind of go into the one that's farthest from me and then through both stitches, both of these legs at the same time, wrap the working yarn around like normal from back to front, pull the needle through, and then drop the 2 stitches off my left needle. Pull everything tighter, and you can see these kind of grouped together, and we've decreased again. And we just have our last stitch, which we want to knit like normal. And you can already see on this side especially, we're starting to kind of turn the work. It's gotten a bit shorter and will slowly decrease in a triangle shape again. By repeating this pattern. But as we move back to the wrong side of the work, we're just going to knit straight across, same as the other stitch pattern, and we repeat this stitch pattern of decreasing on the right side and then knitting straight across on the wrong side until you get back to 3 stitches, and then you cast off. Just knit all the way across. That evens out all your stitches. It kind of gets rid of the yarn overs and or not in yarn overs in this case, but it makes everything even out to just where it's straight knitting again. No weird decreases that bunch up the stitches or anything. So in the past we learned about stitch markers as well, and this would be a prime example of when the right side is different than the wrong side. So you may want to like put a stitch marker on the right side, and then that helps remind you that, oh, when you get to this side, you have to do your decreases or increases, because that's an important step. So you could just lock it on and then be like, when you turn the work, okay, now it's time to increase or decrease. and then on the back side you're just knitting straight across. Another thing you could do is, if you wanted to kind of remind yourself towards the end that, oh, I have to decrease now, you could put in a stitch marker on your needle and have it be, once you get to the last 3 stitches, okay, now I have to do my decrease and then knit. So then once you get across, you see your stitch marker and it's like, okay, now time to decrease. So that's another good use of stitch marker. You can use different colors to mean different things as well. That's just an example. So I'll do one more decrease just to show you, and then we can wrap up. So we knit the first stitch, and to decrease our next 2, we want to knit into both of them at the same time, the front legs of both. So it can be tight sometimes, but just make sure you capture both the legs of yarn and you'll be okay. Wrap around like normal, and now you've decreased again. So we knit all the way to the end. So we're at our last 3 stitches, and we need to knit 2 together again. So we get the front leg of each, wrap our yarn around, and drop them from the left needle, and then we knit the last stitch. Okay, so again, you can see this is starting to slowly decrease. We've kind of turned, and eventually this will be a finished square here once you fully decrease. So now that we've gone through increasing and decreasing, you can knit on this diagonal. So it is a unique pattern, and you can make these triangle shapes, or you can knit it flat and then, you know, sew it together and have it in a circle as well, and make a headband. And you can see, instead of just like a regular garter stitch where it's horizontal stripes, it's in this diagonal shape instead. So it's a nice skill to have. And then it's especially common in these crescent-shaped shawls or triangle-shaped shawls, like this example. And you can do all this in any other type of pattern, holding 2 yarns at the same time to get, you know, fun color combination.